I am very, very happy to see you here and to share with you this wonderful story on which The Tomb of Ligeia, the movie that I made with Vincent Price, is based. Ligeia, a tale of mystery and imagination by Edgar Allan Poe. I cannot for my soul remember how, when, or even precisely where I first became acquainted with the Lady Ligeia. Perhaps I cannot now bring these points to mind, because in truth the character of my beloved, her rare learning, her singular cast of beauty, and the thrilling and enthralling eloquence of her low musical language made their way into my heart by paces so steadily and stealthily progressive that they have been unnoticed and unknown. Yet I believe that I met her first and most frequently in some large, old, decaying city near the Rhine. Ligeia. It is by that sweet word alone that I bring before mine eyes in fancy the image of her who is no more, who was my friend and my betrothed, and who became the partner of my studies and finally the wife of my bosom. And indeed, if ever the wan and misty-winged Astophet of idolatrous Egypt presided, as they tell, over marriages ill-omened, then most surely she presided over mine. There is one dear topic, however, on which my memory fails me not. It is the person of Ligeia. In stature she was tall, somewhat slender. I would in vain attempt to portray the majesty, the quiet ease of her demeanor, or the lightness and elasticity of her footfall. She came and departed as a shadow. In beauty of face, no maiden ever equaled her. Yet her features were not of a classical regularity, and although I perceived that her loveliness was indeed exquisite, I felt there was much of strangeness pervading it. And yet I have tried in vain to trace home my own perception of the strange. I examined the contour of the lofty and pale forehead. It was faultless, the skin rivaling the purest ivory. And then the raven black, the glossy, the luxuriant tresses, setting forth the full force of Homeric hyacinthine. I looked at the delicate outlines of the nose tending to the aquiline, a similar perfection. I regarded the sweet mouth. Here was indeed the triumph of all things heavenly. The magnificent turn of the short upper lip, the soft, voluptuous slumber of the lower, the dimples which sported and the color which spoke, the teeth glancing back with a brilliancy almost starting the holy light of her most radiant of all smiles. And then I peered into the large eyes of Ligeia. They were, I believe, larger than the ordinary eyes of our own race. The hue of the orbs was of the most brilliant of black, and far over them hung jetty lashes of great length. The strangeness, however, which I found in the eyes was of a nature distinct from the color or the brilliancy, and must be referred to the expression. Ah, the expression of the eyes of Ligeia. How for long hours I have struggled to fathom it. That profound something which lay within the pupils of my beloved. What was it? Of all the women whom I have ever known, she, the outwardly calm Ligeia, was the most violently a prey to the tumultuous vultures of passion. And of such passion I could form no estimate save by the miraculous expansion of those large and luminous eyes. by the almost magical melody of her very low voice, and by the fierce energy of the vivid words which she habitually uttered. I have spoken of the learning of Ligeia. It was immense, such as I have never known in a woman. In the classical tongue, she was deeply proficient. On any theme of the most admired, because simply the most abstruse of the boasted erudition of the Academy, have I ever found Ligeia at fault. Indeed, where breathes the man who had traversed all the wide areas of moral, physical, and mathematical science? I was sufficiently aware of her infinite supremacy to resign myself with a childlike confidence to her guidance through the chaotic world of metaphysical investigation at which I was most busily occupied during the earlier years of our marriage. With how vivid a delight did I feel that delicious vista expanding before me, that I might at length pass onward to a goal of a wisdom too divinely precious not to be forbidden. How poignant, then, must be the grief with which, after some years, I beheld my well-grounded expectations take wings in themselves and fly away. Now the radiant luster of her eyes shone less and less frequently upon the pages over which I pored. Ligeia grew ill. The wild eyes blazed with a too glorious effulgence. I saw that she must die. There had been much in her nature to impress me with the belief that to her death would come without its tremors, but not so. Words are impotent to convey the fierceness of resistance with which she wrestled with the shadow. That she loved me I should not have doubted, but in death only was I fully impressed with the strength of her affection. For long hours, detaining my hand, would she pour out before me the overflowing of a heart whose more than passionate devotion amounted to idolatry. In Ligeia's more than womanly abandonment to a love, alas, all unworthily bestowed, I at length recognized the principle of her longing, with so wildly earnest a desire for the life which was now leaving so rapidly away. It is this wild longing, the eager vehemence of desire for life, but for life, that I have no power to portray, no utterance capable of expressing. At high noon of the night on which she departed, she beckoned me peremptorily to her side. She bade me repeat certain verses composed by herself not many days before, and I obeyed her. They were these. Lo, 'tis a gala night within the lonesome latter years. An angel throng, bewinged, bedight in veils and drowned in tears, sit in a theatre to see a play of hopes and fears, while the orchestra breathes fitfully the music of the spheres. Mimes in the form of God on high mutter and mumble low, and hither and thither fly. Mere puppets they who come and go at bidding of vast formless things that shift the scenery to and fro, flapping from out their condor wings invisible woe. That motley drama, oh, be sure it shall not be forgot, with its phantom chased forevermore by a crowd that sees it not, through a circle that ever returneth in to the self-same spot, and much of madness and more of sin, and horror the soul of the plot. But see, amid the mimic rout a crawling shape intrudes, a blood-red thing that writhes from out the scenic solitude. It writhes with mortal pangs, and mimes become its food, and the seraph sob at phantom fangs in human gore imbued. Out, out of the lights, out all. And over each quivering form, the curtain of funeral pall comes down with the rush of a storm. And the angels, all pallid and wan, uprising, unveiling, affirm that the play is the tragedy, man, and its hero, the conqueror worm. Oh, God! Shrieked Ligeia, leaping to her feet and extending her arms aloft. Oh, God! Who knoweth the mysteries of the will with its vigor? Man need not yield him to the angels, nor unto death utterly, save only through the weakness of his feeble will. And now, as if exhausted with emotion, she suffered her white arms to fall and returned solemnly to her bed of death. And as she breathed her last sighs, there came mingled with them a low murmur from her lips. I bent to them my ear and distinguished again the concluding words of the passage in Granville. Man need not yield him to the angels, nor unto death utterly, save only through the weakness of his feeble will. She died, and I, crushed into the very dust with sorrow, could no longer endure the lonely desolation of my dwelling in the decaying city by the Rhine. After a few months, therefore, of weary and aimless wanderings, I purchased and put in some repair an abbey in one of the wildest and most frequented portions of fair England. Yet although the external abbey, with its verdant decay hanging about it, suffered but little alteration, I gave way with a childlike perversity to a display of more regal magnificence within. I had become a bounden slave in the trammels of opium, and my labors had taken a coloring from my dreams. Let me speak only of the one bridal chamber ever accursed, whither in a moment of mental alienation I led from the altar as my bride, as the successor of the unforgotten Ligeia, the fair-haired and blue-eyed Lady Rowena Trevanion of Tremaine. That bridal chamber lay in a high turret of the castellated abbey, and was pentagonal in shape, and of a capacious size. The ceiling of gloomy-looking oak was excessively lofty, and elaborately fretted with gorgeous specimens of a semi-Gothic design. From it depended by a single chain of gold with long links, a huge censer of the same metals, with many perforations out of which writhed a continual succession of parti-colored flames. There was, too, the bridal couch of an Indian model, and sculpted of solid ebony, with a pall-like canopy above. The lofty walls, gigantic in height, were hung in vast folds with a heavy and massive tapestry of the richest cloth of gold, spotted all over with arabesque figures in patterns of jetty black. In a bridal chamber such as this, I passed with the Lady of Tremaine the unhallowed hours of the first month of our marriage. That my wife dreaded the fierce moodiness of my temper, that she shunned me and loved me but little, I could not help perceiving. I loathed her with a hatred belonging more to demon than to man. My memory flew back, oh, with what intensity of regret, to Ligeia, the beloved, the august, the beautiful, the entombed. I reveled in recollections of her passionate, her idolatrous love. In the shackles of my opium dreams, I could not call aloud upon her name. I would restore her to the pathway that she had abandoned upon the earth. About the commencement of the second month of the marriage, the Lady Rowena was attacked with a sudden illness, from which her recovery was slow. In her perturbed state of half-slumber, she spoke of sounds and of motions in and about the chamber of the turret. Her illness became more alarming in character. She spoke again and more infrequently of the sounds and of the unusual motions behind the tapestries. One night, she had just awakened from an unquiet slumber, and I had been watching with feelings of vague terror her emaciated countenance. She partly arose and spoke in an earnest, low whisper of sounds she then heard, but which I could not, of motions which she then saw, but I could not. A deadly pallor overspreading her face, she appeared to be fainting, and I remembered where there was deposited a decanter of light wine which had been ordered by her physicians, and hastened across the chamber to procure it. But as I stepped beneath the light of the censer, two circumstances of a startling nature attracted me. I had felt that some palpable, although invisible, object had passed lightly by my person, and I saw that there lay upon the golden carpet, in the very middle of the rich lustre thrown from the censer, a shadow, a faint, indefinite shadow of angelic aspect, such as might be fancied for the shadow of a shade. But I was wild with the excitement of an immoderate dose of opium, and heeded these things but little, nor spoke of them to Rowena. Having found the wine, I recrossed the chamber and poured out a gobletful, which I held to the lips of the fainting lady. She had partially recovered, however, and took the vessel herself. It was then that I became distinctly aware of a gentle footfall upon the carpet and near the couch. And a second thereafter, as Rowena was in the act of raising the wine to her lips, I saw, or may have dreamed that I saw, fall within the goblet, as if from some invisible spring in the atmosphere of the room, 3 or 4 drops of a brilliant ruby-colored fluid. If I saw this, not so Rowena. She swallowed the wine unhesitatingly, and I forbore to speak to her of a circumstance which must, after all, I considered, have been but the suggestion of a vivid imagination, rendered morbidly active by the terror of the lady, by the opium, and by the hour. Yet immediately subsequent to the fall of the ruby drops, a rapid change for the worse took place in the disorder of my wife, so that on the 3rd subsequent night, the hands of her menials prepared her for the tomb, and on the 4th, I sat alone with her shrouded body in that bridal chamber that had received her as my bride. There rushed upon me 1,000 memories of Ligeia, and then came back into my heart with the turbulent violence of a flood the whole of that unutterable woe with which I had regarded her thus entombed. And with a bosom full of bitter thoughts of the one, only, and supremely beloved, I remained gazing upon the body of Rowena. It might have been midnight, or perhaps later, when a sob, low, gentle, but very distinct, startled me from my reverie. I felt that it came from the bed of death. I listened in an agony of superstitious terror. My soul was awakened within me. I resolutely kept my attention riveted upon the bottom. bound the body. Many minutes elapsed. At length it became evident that a slight and barely noticeable tinge of color had flushed up within the cheeks and along the small veins of the eyelids. I felt my heart cease to beat. My limbs grew rigid where I sat. I could no longer doubt that we had been precipitate in our preparations, that Rowena lived. It was necessary to become immediate exertion to be made. I struggled my endeavors to call back the spirit, yet hovering in the short period. It was certain, however, that a relapse had taken place. The color disappeared from both eyelid and cheek, leaving a wanness even more than that of marble. I fell back with a shudder to the couch from which I had been so startlingly aroused, and again gave myself up to passionate, waking visions of Ligeia. An hour thus elapsed when, could it be possible, I was a second time aware of some vague sound issuing from the region of the bed. I listened in an extremity of horror. The sound came again. It was a sigh. Rushing to the corpse, I distinctly saw a tremor upon the lips. Amazement now struggled in my bosom with profound awe. There was now a partial glow upon the forehead and upon the cheek and the throat. A perceptible warmth pervaded the whole frame. There was even slight pulsation of the heart. The lady lived, and with redoubled ardor I betook myself to the task of restoration. But in vain. Suddenly the color had fled. The pulsation ceased. The lips returned to the expression of the dead, and the whole body took upon itself the icy chillness, the livid hue, the intense rigidity of that which had been for many days a tenant of the tomb. And again I sunk into the visions of Ligeia. And again, oh, what marvel that I shudder as I write it. Again, there reached my ears a low sob from the ebony bed. Time after time, until the period of grey dawn, the hideous dream of revivification was repeated. Each relapse was only into a sterner and apparently more irredeemable death. Each agony wore the aspect of a struggle with some invisible foe, and each struggle was succeeded by a know not what of wild change in the personal appearance of the corpse. I remained sitting rigidly upon the ottoman, a helpless prey to a whirl of violent emotions, of which extreme awe was perhaps the least terrible. Let me hurry to a conclusion. The corpse had stirred, and now more vigorously than ever. The hues of life flushed up with an unwonted energy into the countenance. The limbs relaxed, and save that the eyelids were yet pressed heavily together, and that the bandages and draperies of the grave still imparted their charnel character to the figure, I might have dreamed that Rowena had indeed shaken off utterly the fetters of death. I could doubt it no longer when, arising from the bed, tottering with feeble steps, and with the manner of one bewildered in a dream, the thing that was enshrouded advanced boldly and palpably into the middle of the apartment. I stirred not, but gazed upon the apparition. There was a wild disorder in my thoughts. Could it indeed be the living Rowena who confronted me? Could it indeed be Rowena at all? The fair-haired, the blue-eyed Lady Rowena Trevanion of Tremaine? Why should I doubt it? The bandage lay heavily upon the mouth, but then might it not be the mouth of the breathing Lady of Tremaine? And the cheeks, there were the roses as in her noon of life. Yet might there not be the fair cheeks of the living Lady of Tremaine? But had she not grown taller since her malady? What irrepressible madness seized me with that thought? One bound and I had reached her at last. I reached her feet. Shrinking from my touch, she let fall from her head, unloosened, the ghastly cerements which had confined it. And there, streaming forth into the rushing atmosphere of the chamber, huge masses of long and disheveled hair. It was darker than the raven wings of midnight. And then slowly opened the eyes of the figure which stood before me. Here then at least, I shrieked aloud, can I never be mistaken? Those are the full and the black and the wild eyes of my lost love, of the Lady Ligeia. Thank you. Well, those of you who have seen the movie The Tomb of Ligeia will not exactly see that story. And I must say, when I was cast, I read the story, this book of mystery and imagination. And I read that story and fell in love with Ligeia. And when I read the script, I was highly indignant on her behalf. Because there she was, the beloved Ligeia, as this menacing figure in the back. So I said to Roger Corman, I expressed these feelings to him. And I said, but you have not done justice to Ligeia. And he said, well, Elizabeth, an opium dream is not very cinematic. So he and the writer, Robert Town, found something to put in its place that was also, as in period, mesmerism. And so this became a hypnotic spell. And of course, Robert Town created the character of Rowena, who I then fell in love with, herself. And indeed, because it was a love story, he had, Robert Town said, we must have a younger man, Richard Chamberlain. And quite rightly, Roger Corman said, no way. and so they needed a young woman who was not an ingenue, so they chose me. And both Vincent and I had a classical background, so we both felt at home in the Gothic world. And so Rowena had no problem falling in love with Verdun Fell, I can tell you. I also want to thank Braxton for that beautiful. Just as I have my CDs here, I'm sure he has his as well. Yes. And please say the name of your music.
Well, I'm one half of a Gothic metal band from Greenville, South Carolina called Valentine, Wolfe. We played Friday. We play dark music, dark heavy metal, but we also like combining it with the strange, the grotesque, the Arabesque. Edgar Allan Poe is near and dear to both members of the band. Our CDs are right outside, and this was a pleasure. Everything I just did, it's a little bit different from what we did on Friday. Everything you just heard, I improvised. That was all. And
Wow.
it was amazing. It was, oh, thank you. There's some effects on it, but for those of you who can see my feet, no tricks, it was just hands, face. A little bit of delay, but no loops, no prepared tricks, nothing up our sleeves. Thank you for letting me.
What is this instrument?
Well, thank you. That was a thrill for me.
This instrument is an electric upright bass. It is not a cello. A lot of people think it's a cello. I never mind, because normally if people can think of a cellist, they can think of Yo-Yo Ma, so I always feel like subconsciously they've connected us. So but it's a big double bass, just like the instrument you would see in the back of the orchestra, stand-up bass, doghouse, string bass, I've heard them all. And I have an extra fifth string to accurately play the narrator's shrieks and creaks and ruby red drops. So
Yes. Well, I heard last night, on Friday night, and that is so versatile, that instrument.
Yes.
The sounds from the whole range is so beautiful. Yes. So I must say that in the end, working on the film, I really knew it was a love story. And playing both Rowena and Ligeia, although Ligeia hasn't got so much to do, because I had got to know her in the story, I knew who she was, so that when she did make her appearance, I was able to do the transition. If you remember, in the hypnotism scene, Rowena is taken back to her girlhood, and she's trying to catch a butterfly, and it flies away, and she cries. And so Verdon says, "And what do you do when you? What does your mother get you do when you cry?" And she sings to me. So she said, "Will you sing the song?" So, I have a bonnet trimmed with blue. Do you wear it? Yes, I do. Will you wear it when I can? Going to the ball with my young man. I have a bonnet trimmed with blue. Do you wear it? Yes, I do. I will. Man need not live among the angels, nor dwell in death entirely, save for the weakness of his feeble will. I will always be your wife. So it seemed to me that this was, both women loved Verdon in their different ways. Ligeia passionately, possessively, and Rowena compassionately and redeemingly in the end, because she is able then, when she realizes what has happened, she is able to release him from the spell by impersonating Ligeia in order to release him. And so I think it is a beautiful love story, in the spirit still of mystery and imagination and Edgar Allan Poe. So I would love to answer any questions that you might have.
Well, I've got a
Yes.
question. You were standby for a play on Broadway called Pack of Lies.
Yes.
And I wanted to know, with Rosemary Harris and Patrick McGowan, and I was just curious what you might remember about that experience.
Yes, I was thrilled to work with Patrick McGowan, whom I had worked with in Secret Agent. When I was against him, I was a German woman, and he got the better of me, I'm afraid. But what I remember about that, interestingly, Patrick McGowan had not been on stage for many, many, many years. And of course, playing the detective, he should have been in some, Macintosh, and dressed down. But Patrick McGowan certainly wasn't going to be seen looking drab. And so he dressed himself absolutely Savile Row. And because of his background, people in the audience sort of got this idea that he must be some sort of double agent here, and so Rosemary Harris wasn't too happy about that. that I remember quite vividly. And I also remember one night we had a party, as one is wont to do, and we were all sitting around, having had a few drinks, and I was sitting on the floor next to Patrick when we played an episode of The Prisoner.
Oh, nice.
And as he was watching this, I heard him mutter, "How did I get away with that?" But I also, years before, when he was still working in the theatre, because he started in the theatre and was a brilliant theatre actor, I saw him play Ibsen's Brand wonderfully. Oh, God, he was good. And I was so sorry that we didn't see more of him in the theatre. Although, of course, at least that would have vanished and we still have him on film. But also, he was a Irish Catholic. When I worked with him, I was told, "You are never to touch Mr. McGowan," which was interesting. I mean, but he was, I was thrilled to work with him. And yes, so I was glad to have had several experiences with him, yes. Anything else you are curious about?
I actually had a question.
Yes.
If I may. So in the Tomb of Ligeia, we rewatched it recently.
Yes.
Was it just the one cat? Because we found the whole cat trained by credit very amusing. So was it just the one?
Thereby hangs
eyeglasses feet in the film, or?
When we, because it was the last of the Poe films, Roger wanted to really make it special. So he was already in England for The Masque of the Red Death. So we were there already. He and Vincent had always wanted to make a film with real ruins. Mm-hmm. So he went with the British Heritage Society to all their wonderful, and chose Castle Acre, which was perfect for the Abbey. And so we were on location in Swaffham, in Norfolk, near Castle Acre. And the first cat, the cat on location, the cat that is there on the tomb, which is the cat that Rowena first sees, was lent by a woman in Swaffham. And that amateur cat was the best actor. Because when I looked up, the way that cat looked at me, oh, there was Ligeia, yes. And then there's the scene, of course, when Ligeia's spirit, when the cat leaps onto the tomb, onto the coffin, and Vincent swipes the cat, and the cat ran off and got lost. Filming on a Roger Corman film, unheard of, stopped while we went to look for the cat. And we never did. I've always hoped, I pray that cat was found, because it was her own. So that was the first cat. And the other cats, the cat that had the glasses tied hated those glasses. Oh, he was trying to get rid of those glasses. Oh. So I had to endow the menace. You know how sometimes you're with an actor who isn't doing it, so you have to pretend they are. So I pretended that cat was menacing me. And so then there was all the throwing of the cat. Because the cat wrangler would be off the side, you know, and so when it's in the bedroom when the cat attacks me at some point, and so the cat is thrown at me, and so there are pictures of me going, indeed, you know, it's true. And Vincent, of course, had the cat thrown at him many times in the last scene. And then, of course, when Rowena is scratched in that wonderful scene in the kitchen, when Verdun and Rowena are starting to get close, well, Ligeia doesn't want that to happen. So there was a cat's paw, a prop paw, that had holes in the claws, and he had a blood sponge, the prop man. So at the side of the screen, this prop paw would come against my cheek, and he'd squeeze the blood to make the scratches. And then, of course, we had to make them up exactly the same. And so that was how that was done. I didn't have the cat actually come and scratch me, I'm glad to say. It was a prop paw. But working with animals, yes, has its own life of its own, yes. No, I'm glad you asked that question. Very glad. Yes.
So I wanted to know how you decided to get into acting. Did you go to RADA or something like that?
No, I didn't. You know, I'm a missionary's daughter, a minister's daughter. And very often, well, like Laurence Olivier, you know, quite often, a lot of us preachers' kids become actors. And there's a lot in common, because, first of all, a preacher and, I believe, an actor, I regard my life as a vocation, a calling, not a career. And so, in the same way as my father would wear his heart on his sleeve in a pulpit to touch the members of his congregation, I feel it is my job then to open my heart on a stage to touch the hearts of my audience. And so that I felt that I was attracted to my version of this profession. And also, I think that in the same way as my mother's hands were alive on the pianoforte. She just knew, her fingers knew where to put them on the notes. I didn't inherit that. But I can take words off a page in the same way. I can just do that. That was my gift. And so I think, you know, you follow your gift. And so, and I loved, it wasn't so much showing off, but, you know, church socials, I would recite and all that kind of thing. So, but then I went to Bristol University, which was the only university in the 1950s, I mean, I go back that far, which had a drama department. And so, because the theatre world was so far from my very sheltered Methodist upbringing, my parents felt that the university would be a step into the real world, you know, before the wicked theatre world. So I did a lot of, I was secretary of the Dramatic Society and acted, you know, in as many plays as I could. And then the Sunday Times ran a student drama festival. And the first year it was held in Bristol, and I was part of the organization. But the second year, it was held in London. And one of our members did a new translation of an Ugo Betti play. And Ugo Betti was a writer who was very big in the West End at the time, Queen and the Rebels, so because it was a new Ugo Betti, professional people came to see our production. And I had a wonderful role, the Sunday Times Harold Hobson gave me a wonderful notice. But that was the most precious notice of my life, in that it said something like, you know, I transcended the amateur into true emotion, and it just confirmed that I was right, that this was for me, you know. Yes. And Wendy Toy, who was a wonderful choreographer and dancer and producer now, she came and round afterwards and said, well, you are going into the profession. I said, well, yes, I want to, but I don't quite know how to start. She said, oh, I'll help you. So that was lucky. And so she introduced me to Peter Eade, who became my manager. And so I said, but I suppose I should go to drama school. He said, well, why don't you go and audition for repertory companies and see what happens? So I auditioned for Birmingham and Manchester, the Manchester Library Theatre. And I chose then to go to the Manchester Library Theatre. But in the old days, you know, the profession that I started with in the late 50s, early 60s, and then, you know, into the 60s and 70s, bears no relation to the profession that is now. Because theatre was it. These resident theatre companies was I learned on the job. Because in a resident theatre company, a repertory company, you would have a permanent company, all sorts of different plays, some roles you were right for. The classical roles I felt quite comfortable with. The modern roles, because I was so unsophisticated in life, the modern roles were more difficult for me. But I learned on the job, you know, and learned from the senior members of the company. And so I did a lot of repertory. And then, with the timing in the 60s was really the golden age of television in England, because it was just starting. In the same way why Shakespeare, you know, theatre was just starting then, so everybody was writing plays for theatre. Well, now when television was starting, everybody, all the great Alan Owen, did Joy, his play, and John Mortimer, and John Hopkins, and so I was in lots of television, wonderful television, where you would have, you know, play anthologies, you know, the Wednesday play, the Saturday matinee, and so I got lots and lots of experience, but quite honestly, to begin with, we were a bit snobby about media. Well, film, you know, big film, feature film. Television was something that you would do on the side, sort of. But now, of course, television is it.
Yes.
And television is coming more into its own, because, you know, with series, then you can develop a story, you know, and it gives actors a chance to go deeper into characterization and stuff. But when celebrity became the name of the game, which was all to do with ratings, it has changed my profession. Because in the old days, if you were the best thing they saw at an audition, you would get the part. Now you can't even get the audition unless you are that big a name. So and so I know, because I teach Shakespeare at the Stella Adler Studio to young actors, I'm preparing them for a very different way of how, and they have to create a lot of their own work now, you know, to keep knowing that they are a creative actor. And of course I wish them success, you know, but it's different. It's different. But there's, you know, curiously enough, people now are creating stuff on Zoom, not waiting to be asked, you know. Yeah. They're putting it out on Zoom, so maybe this is a something that will be good, yes.
What's also new, I think, is I've seen so many TV shows, series on various streaming services that are professionally made, and I don't recognize a single actor in the cast, so they're desperate now, and they're going out and getting new people that have never been on, maybe they've been on stage, but they've never been national.
Yes,
Here in America. And,
yes.
And I'm sure still in England too. There's a lot of competition.
Oh, yes.
Only so many actors that are
Well,
famous.
now, I mean, as I said, Bristol in the old days in England
Yeah.
was the only, but now every single university has a drama program, and all the conservatories, every year when my students graduate, I'm thinking of all these hundreds and thousands of new actors pouring into a profession. Well, there's not enough work for those of us already there. Yes.
In terms of your background in theater, television, movies, I understand it all falls under the craft of acting. Did you have a discipline that you liked more, a medium that you liked more?
Well, the theatre is the actor's medium, in my opinion, because in the theatre I am entrusted with the whole of my role, and I share all of it with you. And of course, we work together as a company then, to create the role, the story. But then we are the storytellers. I always consider that in film and television, my task is to provide the director with the best raw material I possibly can. And then it is up to them to show what parts of my performance they choose will be best for telling how they're going to tell the story. So it's different. It is thrilling, and the state of being that you need to be for feature film acting can be extremely underrated, because when people say, oh, it looks as if they're doing nothing, well, good, because they're just being so in the moment, and so natural. So I would say that in preparing a role, it's the same. And my theatre background is good for film in that when I'm preparing a script, I know I create the character from start to finish, which is just as well, because I may start even with the end scene, or certainly a scene in the middle somewhere, but because I have charted my course through the character, I will know exactly where I would be at that time. And so my theatre training and my way of creating a character and doing the background on the character and the backstory and everything will be the same. But then the calibration of how the amount of, the truth will always be the same, but the amount of energy with which you then tell the truth will be different in theatre and film. Yes.
So, have you seen whether television, especially starting in the 60s or something, became more intimate than stage because you're closer to the actor
Yes.
when you're seeing them on the screen than you are even in a stage play where you might be 20 rows back?
Oh,
has that,
absolutely.
Have you seen that as going from the actor saying, oh, I can be much more intimate here in front of
Yes.
this camera?
And I sometimes think of it like this, that screen is like watercolor and theatre is like oils.
Yes.
And to see an oil, you need to be further away.
Right.
And so I have to lay it on thicker on the stage.
Yes.
And as truthfully, but be so full of the feeling that I can be truthful, but also large enough to reach the back
And
row.
it feels like you're overacting if you're used to doing film or television.
Right. But if you do it like that on television, of course, then, you are overacting.
Yes, exactly. Like I said, it feels like you're overacting.
Yes. but I found that actually you can use more energy on the small screen
Yes,
than on the huge screen,
yes.
where you need to be completely identified in the moment, and you need to very little. As long as the thought is in your eye, then you will see it. But on the little screen, smaller, mind you, television is now often very big.
Yes. Well, they're now really huge.
Yes, yes.
But, and then, and just for my own personal thing, how do you feel about when you're doing radio or audio drama? Because that's very different also.
Absolutely. And the wonderful thing about radio drama, which I was brought up on, you know, pre-television, the BBC Repertory Company,
Yes.
and I would listen to all the time. And if you just have the voice, then your own imagination will fill in everything else, you know. So in many ways, radio, I think, has more mystery and imagination than any of the others.
And special effects are cheaper.
Absolutely, yes, sure, absolutely.
And, you know, we had this guy named Orson Welles, you may have heard of him.
Oh, absolutely, the master, yes. But, you know, when I started doing these conventions, I think it was about 2008 when I came back again to a friend of mine, Roy Frumkis, he said, oh, I'm going to doing a convention, Cinema Wasteland. Shall I tell them about it? So I said, oh, sure. Well, when I discovered these conventions, I was absolutely thrilled. I was so touched, and that to find how these films are loved. And so this is a chance for me finally to meet the audience.
Yes.
So I'm very grateful for it, and I'm grateful for your love and interest in our work, absolutely. I think this is really important, and it's nice to have, you know, a convention on which is not corporate. Some of them now become so corporate, you know, with the entire cast of the Walking Dead, you know. Well, that's not nostalgia. But you know, for us to have a chance to talk, for me to meet you, and for you to be able to ask me things and find out who I am in real life. So I'm all for this, and I'm glad. I mean, now the circuit is beginning to open up again, but I think we've all been missing it. Yes. Thank you. So I would be very happy if you would like to buy one of these CDs, which also has on it Annabel Lee and a poem called Romance, and poems written for his cousin, appropriately called Elizabeth. So there are poems on here, and so I will sign it for you for $20. And you can listen to it at your leisure, the whole story, which is about twice as long, but just as good. So, thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.